In this dirty old part of the city where the sun refused to shine, people tell me there ain't no use in trying. Now my girl, you're so young and pretty, and one thing I know is true, you'll be dead before your time is due. I know. Watch my daddy in bed and crying, watch his hair been turning gray.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Blue Mountains Theatre. I'm Yvonne Helmers, I manage the programming in the theatre. I'd like to acknowledge that we have some really special guests here today for this event. David Stratton, Tom Jeffrey, Brian Brown, Mayor Mark Greenhill, Councillor Romola Hollywood, and of course, our Vietnam veterans. Thank you. We're really honoured to co-present this event with the vets. They're actually tenants in our building and they're a really great bunch of blokes. And I also need to mention Wendy, who works with them, who's the one woman in their office. She's an amazing woman. It's fantastic to have such a full house for this event, which is of course a fundraiser for the Vietnam veterans and Soldier On. I'd now like to invite Mayor Mark Greenhill, OAM, to the stage to say a few words. Thank you.
Hello, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Mark Greenhill. I'm the Mayor of the City of Blue Mountains. My voice has been fading all weekend, but hopefully it'll last the next 5 minutes. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are here today on the country of the Darug and the Gundungurra peoples. Acknowledge that the City of Blue Mountains is located in the country of traditional owners. The Blue Mountain City Council recognises the Darug and Gundungurra traditional owners have a continuous, deep connection to country. It's called Ungara. And that is an enduring connection that has great cultural significance to Aboriginal people locally and in the region. And I'd like to acknowledge Darug and Gundungurra elders who may be present here today and past elders, and pay on behalf of us all deepest respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. And on behalf of the City of Blue Mountains, it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here today to the 40th anniversary screening of the feature film, The Odd Angry Shot. I found the revelation that the film came out 40 years ago personally troubling and disturbing because I remember it well, and that must mean that I'm not as young as I'd like to be. And I want to thank you all for coming here today and supporting this fundraiser that's been organised by the Blue Mountains Vietnam Veterans Association and Blue Mountain City Council. This event, as you may know, will raise money for Soldier On, which supports our modern day veterans and their families, all veterans in fact, and it's a fantastic fundraiser for us to be part of and a great initiative. I'd like to acknowledge our special guests as well, David Stratton AM. David moved to the Blue Mountains just after I did, and we both discussed whether or not, having moved here nearly 30 years ago, we yet rate as locals, and we're nearly there, David. David will be known to all of you as a writer, presenter, and eminent film historian. Tom Jeffrey, AM, the director, producer, and screenplay writer of The Odd Angry Shot. Tom, you had a bit of a role, writing, directing, and producing this wonderful film. Welcome here today. And Brian Brown, AM, who needs no introduction, one of the stars of the ensemble cast of the wonderful film Odd Angry Shot. Brian, welcome here today. Thank you. And we thank you, all of you, for so generously giving your time, because I know that you are three very busy people. And I know that we're all looking forward to the Q&A event that will occur at the end. I'd also like to acknowledge from the bottom of my heart that we have in the audience today a large number of Vietnam veterans and their families, many of whom live in the Blue Mountains, some of whom nearby. Can I say very deeply, most personally, that you honour us with your presence today, and we are very, very pleased to have you here, and we thank you for the service you've rendered our country. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you, as well as any other servicemen and women from the Australian Armed Forces who may be here today, who may be serving now or have served in the past. You are very welcome here today, and we thank you too for your service to our country. From the depths of our hearts, we say that that service is deeply significant. And from the depths of our hearts, we say that that service is deeply unselfish. And from the depths of our hearts, we say that that service should always be acknowledged for what it is, an incredible gesture. So we are, as I say, just so deeply proud that we've got veterans and their families and serving and previously serving men and women in the audience today. And while it is difficult to single anyone out, in an audience like this, it's often fraught with danger to single anyone out. I do want to single out Diane Field and her son Michael, who are here in the audience today. Diane was married to Private Ronald Field, and Ronald lived in Hazelbrook and enlisted as a soldier, and was tragically lost in action in 1965 rather, very early in the Vietnam War. We acknowledge you both here today, and Diane and Michael, we thank you very much for your presence in the audience today. Thank you for being here. Indeed, in 2013, as councillors of the city, we came to know the story of Private Ronald Field when the Blue Mountains Vietnam Veterans Association proposed to name the pedestrian bridge at Hazelbrook in his memory. The Vietnam veterans proposed the naming of this bridge as a companion to the Long Tan Bridge in Springwood, which recognises the service of our veterans and each year we hold the Blue Mountains Vietnam Veterans and Associated Armed Forces Memorial Day right here in Springwood, where we are at the moment, on the weekend closest to Long Tan Day. And this important event to honour the service and sacrifice of our armed services in the Vietnam War took place just last weekend. But back in 2013, Vietnam veteran Terry Deneen, who is also here today, told us all, the elected councillors of the city, Private Ronald Field's story. And I have to say that after he told that story, there was a unanimous decision to name the bridge at Hazelbrook in Private Ronald Field's honour. And it's wonderful to have you here today, Diane. We know that you've supported many veterans over the years who found life hard when we didn't, as a nation, do the right thing and recognise their service in the right way. And I'm so glad, although it was many years later, finally this country did do the right thing and recognise the service of Vietnam veterans. I also recognise that two soldiers from the Blue Mountains, Private Ronald Field and Corporal Bob Bowtells, were part of the historic repatriation of 33 servicemen and their descendants in 2016. And I know, because I was there, this was an incredibly significant and moving event for all of us, but it must have been for you, and for the Vietnam veterans in our community and beyond. It's one of those things in many, many years of service as the city's mayor, I will never, ever forget that day. That repatriation was moving beyond words. I thank all of the Blue Mountains Vietnam veterans, and particularly the committee members who've worked hard to make this event today possible. And I also acknowledge the work of the staff of the Blue Mountains Theatre and Community Hub in making the event today possible. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge that's supporting the event here today. We have the State Member for Blue Mountains, Trish Doyle MP, Councillor and Second Deputy Mayor of the City of Blue Mountains, Romola Hollywood, who I know played a big role in not only standing up and supporting the veterans and naming the bridge after Private Ronald Field, but also in introducing the Blue Mountains Vietnam veterans to her father, Tom Jeffrey, the director, producer and screenplay writer of The Odd Angry Shot. Tom and I have just had a conversation about Romola and her years growing up that I'll be happy to share with her at our next caucus meeting. I also want to recognise Councillor... No, we didn't. That was actually a joke. I thought about it, but I thought it'd be wrong. Councillor Daniel Miles and Councillor Brent Hoare are both here today, and I thank them both for their presence. We do have apologies from the member for Macquarie, Susan Templeman MP, who did very much want to be here today but couldn't be. The Deputy Mayor of the City of Blue Mountains, Chris Vanderklay, who is working with the Rural Fire Service today, and the Odd Angry Shot producer, Sue Milliken AO, who would like to have been here today but couldn't be. Well, thank you all for coming. It's time now to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for those wonderful words. Now, did anybody see the documentary, David Stratton, A Cinematic Life? What a great film that is. I was so moved when I saw that film because a lot of the films that David discussed in that documentary and were shown were films that I grew up with. And I always remember when I was in my early teens, my dad actually showed me the film Look Back in Anger, and that's when I understood what great Australian filmmaking could be about. David Stratton has spent a life in film, so to speak, and he's so promoted the Australian film industry. We are so honoured to have him hosting this event today. Please give him a very big warm welcome.
Thank you, Vanna. I'm not going to say very much at all. Welcome to this. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today. It's really very exciting, and I know that Tom Jeffrey, the director of the film, is very excited at the thought of such a substantial audience watching the film, because that doesn't happen very often these days. Tom, as you've heard, wrote or scripted, produced and directed The Odd Angry Shot, which was released 40 years ago. But it was based on a book by William Nagel. And William Nagel served in Vietnam. He was in the catering corps, and in March 1966, at the age of 21, he was assigned to the SAS regiment as cook. Unfortunately, he was found later on to have disobeyed a lawful command and was sentenced to 14 days in the brig without pay. The lawful command he disobeyed, he refused to cook egg custard. Now, I think that anecdote gives you some idea that the film you're about to see, many of you will have seen it before, I'm sure, is a film with a great sense of humour. I watched it again a couple of days ago, and it struck me, first of all, how wonderfully warm it was, how beautifully it portrayed the reality of what it must have been like to be, which many of you in the audience will know firsthand, like in Vietnam. And it also boasts an amazing ensemble of Australian acting talent, with, of course, Brian Brown, but also Graham Kennedy, who is amazingly good in it, John Jarrett, John Hargreaves, the late John Hargreaves, Graham Blundell, and a whole lot more. The cook is played by Graham Rouse, and he's terrific too. So I hope you enjoy the film, and I'll be back for a Q&A afterwards with Tom and Brian, and look forward to getting some questions from the audience as well. Enjoy it. Thank you very much indeed.
He volunteered for service. They made him quite a man. Farewell, my son. Go with your friends. Go off to Vietnam.
This is the way to go to war, eh, Harry?
His mother cried a little. His girlfriend said she'd write. No time for sentimentals. You get out there and fight.
So come and see this band of men. Cry a little, laugh a lot. Aussies being Aussies in the odd angry shot.
Harry was their corporal with a dry and witty tongue. He kept their spirits high with his wicked sense of fun.
Who are you expecting? Steve McQueen?
No such luck.
What's this mess?
Sauerkraut, smart ass.
Oh, be nice, Cookie, or I'll shove your head in it.
They sent out Rogers, Dawson, Harry, Bill and Scott. But Scott got hit. He died that day from the first odd angry shot.
So come and see this band of men. Cry a little, laugh a lot. Aussies being Aussies in the odd angry shot.
Then Bung came armed with tinnies, a pet spider and a smile. They fought the Yanks, they fought the Kong. They did it all with style. They did it all together, even in Saigon. There may have been a war out there, but the fun went on and on.
Got a better idea. Why don't we get ourselves a room in the best hotel with the best tours in the joint and have a party? What do you say? God bless America!
But comrades, mates, side by side, they carried in their head the daily danger they were in. Who wants to end up dead?
So come and see this band of men. Cry a little, laugh a lot. Aussies being Aussies in the odd angry shot. So come and see this band of men. Cry a little, laugh a lot. Aussies being Aussies in the odd angry shot.
Welcome to the stage. Here we go. Tom Jeffrey. And Brian Brown. Well, it's as I said before the film, I think it's an exceptional film, and it was the first Australian film made about the Vietnam War, and I think it stands up really well after 40 years. It certainly gives the impression of being the real deal. Tom, can I just start by asking you, Bill Nagle's book, it won the National Book Council Award in 1975.
Yep.
How did you decide to make the film?
Well, it was Sue Milliken who read it first and thought it was the basis. It could be the basis for a good movie, and I had a read of it then and thought likewise. We were concerned about it being about Vietnam because in those days nobody really wanted to know anything about the war. They wanted to forget it. It had been such a divisive experience in our society at the time. But we thought that the humour in the story, the humour that Bill had got into the story, would carry it through. And in fact, that proved to be so. So that's where it started from. I took it away. Sue was shooting Picture Show Man up in Tamworth, and I sat in the motel room for 8 days and did the first draft, and so on and so on.
And Brian, how did you first become involved with this?
Tom had done a movie called
Weekend of Shadows. Yeah.
Weekend of Shadows in South Australia, and I was just starting to get into movies, getting some small roles and stuff, and I knew that he was doing The Odd Angry Shot, so I rang him and said, are you thinking about using me in Odd Angry Shot? And he went, yeah, I am. And I thought, bloody glad I rang him. And that was it, and he assembled his cast and off we went to shoot it.
So it is a marvellous cast. Tom, can you talk a little bit about the casting? I mean, Graham Kennedy, this was the second film role he'd played after Don's Party.
Yes, that's right. In fact, I'd seen him in Don's Party, Graham, and thought he was terrific, as indeed he is, and I thought he would make a great Harry in The Odd Angry Shot. He was doing Blankety Blanks at the time and was staying in the Boulevard Hotel, which now no longer exists. I managed to find out his room number and got him a copy of the script, bypassing his very tough agent, Harry Miller, only to receive, pardon me, a phone call about a week later from Harry saying, how dare you not consult me about this. But Graham read the script and loved it and told Harry that he wanted to do it, and that was that. And then as Brian has just said, Brian was in Weekend of Shadows, as indeed was Graham Blundell, Graham Rouse and so forth. And having worked with those lads in Weekend of Shadows, I wanted to reassemble them if I could, as many of them as I could, for The Odd Angry Shot. But Graham was kind of the linchpin. He was fantastic in the movie, as I think you would agree, gave a wonderful performance. But more than that, he brought, at the time, brought an amazing amount of publicity to the film. And Harry Miller said to me much later, he said, boy, Graham was probably worth $250,000 worth of publicity to you. And I said, well, that's your estimate, and thank you very much indeed.
Now, I believe it was filmed in Queensland at the Army Land Warfare Centre at Canungra, or around about there?
Yes, that's right, all the war. We went up there. In fact, I've got to pay a tribute to the Australian Army and Defence Forces for all the help that they gave to us in the film. We couldn't have made it without their assistance. And they were a bit wary about getting involved in the first place. But once they came on board, and they gave us every support that we could expect, including the permission to build the camp up there in Canungra. And we unfortunately wanted to stay originally in the mess there, but they couldn't accommodate us, so we had to drive up every day from Surfers Paradise, which of course enabled the boys to get up to all sorts of mischief in the evening when we got back. Brian might want to tell you about that, but perhaps that should remain secret.
It's interesting because just 2 or 3, maybe 4 years beforehand, Francis Ford Coppola had wanted to make Apocalypse Now in Queensland and applied to the Australian Armed Services for logistical support, which they totally refused. And as a result, Apocalypse Now was filmed in the Philippines. But do you think it was, you got the okay because it was an Australian production rather than American production?
Well, actually,
there's a story.
I think we've got it, yes, there's a bit of a story there. Sue's family comes from up the north coast, and up at that time there was a family friend who was the Member of Parliament, and he was persuaded to make a representation to the Minister for Defence, whose name I can't remember who it was at the time, which he did, and that kind of opened a couple of doors for us. And we had to send the script down to Canberra. It was vetted, and they made some suggestions. And one of the things we had to agree to was to have an Australian Army advisor with us on the set every day, and to be guided. He was an ex-SAS officer, and he was helpful on the whole, and helped us with a lot of the movements through the jungle with the boys and so forth, to make sure that we got it all right.
Brian, what are your memories of that shoot? Because it was fairly early in your career.
Well, I remember first of all being very glad I was going to do a movie again. You got to remember, in those days, in the mid-70s, late 70s, the resurgence of the Australian film industry had just started, and we were all blokes of 30, 31 or something, and no one had done movies before. Way before the war, there was the odd movie, but like all of a sudden, we were like, not arrogantly, but we felt like gunslingers. We felt like we'd arrive in a town, okay, now we're going to make a movie. It was a pretty extraordinary thing, and we just embraced it in every way possible, and as 31-year-olds too. And what I do remember was that a lot of the times we had to make sure we were back at the motel where we were going to be picked up in the morning at 6 a.m, that we better get back before 6 a.m. I remember that very much. I also remember on the first night out, we got banned from about 5 discos within an hour. So we were left with one dive at the Gold Coast that we could go to every night, but we seemed to relish that dive. I remember very much the help that the great help that the Army gave us. A lot of the fellows that are in there were from the Army, and I think in particular John Hargrave's platoon were regular Army, and they were great to us. And I mean, the truth of it was, there we were play acting soldiers, and these boys were really soldiers. Our job was to try and portray them in a respectful and real way. That was our job, but they were the ones that were, in the Army, and if they were going to be called again, they were the ones who were going to fight. The significance of this movie for me was that I remember getting my letter saying, "You are indefinitely deferred." And I always think about that when I see this, or there's a new movie out called Danger Close, which is about Vietnam too, and I saw recently. And every time I see this, I just think, my birthday didn't get pulled out of the ballot to say you're off to Vietnam. And if it had, I could either be dead or in some way scarred by that experience, which is an extraordinary experience that the men, and many of them here today, had to go through. I'm incredibly grateful that I didn't have to experience what the boys had to experience. But our job was to try and portray them honestly and as young Australian fellas, and that was what the reality of the whole movie was.
Well, since you've raised that question, can I ask you both? Brian, since you've got the mic, you may as well carry on. Making the film, did you feel a great responsibility to be playing this Australian soldiers in Vietnam?
It's a good question, and I can't answer it glibly. I know the idea was, when you're doing a movie, the idea is it's a story, is to tell the story as honestly by the script and whatever. We were playing young Australian men, and we all knew how to be an Australian bloke. We knew what our way of dealing with life is different to an American way of dealing with life, or an English way of dealing with life. So our job was to bring the Australian personality to the story and deliver it as honestly as possible. And I don't think that we did feel that responsibility. Like we knew we were, we had a job to do, but I don't think we felt a responsibility to get it right. We had a responsibility to deliver the characters. They had the responsibility to get it right. You know.
Okay, so if you pass the mic to Tom, he can tell us about that.
Sue and I wanted to do this film about Vietnam because we'd been opposed to the war. Most of us involved in the making of the film had been opposed to the war. What we wanted to do was to, from making a movie point of view, was to be able to bring the subject matter to the screen so that discussion, debate could be had about our role in Vietnam. And the other thing that concerned us at the time was that, as I said earlier, nobody really wanted to talk about it. You know, it had been such a divisive thing in our society. You know, a lot of people like us had been opposed to it. But the main thing was, from my point of view as the director of the film, was to be able to put the script that had been written and had been approved by any number of people in the army, to do it as realistically and as authentically as possible up on the screen. And I suppose that's where I started from. The fact that it still resonates 40 years later, which is absolutely amazing, and we never expected that when we started out, is proof of the pudding, I think.
Well, you mentioned authenticity, and we're going to hopefully have one or two questions from the audience in a minute, but it struck me that it felt incredibly authentic. I mean, the details, the rain, the problem with foot rot and tinea or whatever it was, all that sort of thing. I mean, it just felt this was real.
Yeah. Even though we sort of joke about Bill Nagel's role and being a cook and all of that stuff, he had been there. And in fact, so had any number of our advisors and helpers. So from that point of view, we did get it right. You know, the tinea and the leeches and all of that. That was right. The one thing that wasn't right was the orangutan joke. And those of you that know anything about orangutans know that there are none in Vietnam. It was an old World War II joke from Borneo that Bill thought he'd put in. I thought it was a great joke, so we kept it in. But apart from that, I think it's pretty good.
I mean, something like the battle between the scorpion and the spider. Did Bill claim that really happened?
I don't know. I really don't. But it was pretty good too, isn't it?
Good scene.
I think there was a fair degree of, you know, mock rivalry between the Aussies and the Australians, but they did operate as separate entities, and particularly the SAS would go out and sit in the jungle for 9 days and not have a poo because the smell might give their position away and things like that. I mean, you can't get that on the screen, but I think where Bill says, geez, I'd love a Passiona, kind of conveys the feeling of just being stuck there, you know, waiting.
I'll just tell you a story about authenticity. We have to do the big fight all the boys go at each other in there, and so they brought over this guy, Billy. What was his?
Buddy Joe.
Buddy Joe Hooker was his name, and he was an American stuntman. Lovely fella, and he came over to arrange the fight. Anyway, so we did the fight, as you've seen, and I bumped into him a number of years later in LA, and he was with some other stuntmen. He said to him, "Oh my Jesus," he said, "Brian," he said, "I went over and I had to do this Vietnam War and get them to have this big fight." He said, "I didn't have to teach them much." He said, "I just said go," and he said they beat the shit out of each other.
My recollection was more than the recollection I know. The reviews were a bit mixed, weren't they? And do you think that was because it was the first Australian film about Vietnam? And I'm a reviewer myself, as you know, but I think sometimes reviewers talk about not the film that it is, but the film that they think it ought to be, that they would have made.
That's very, very true, David. I remember, particularly from Melbourne, we copped it a lot, and I think that, you know, even Colin Bennett, whom I knew, sort of gave us a serve because they did seem to want to have a different kind of film. Well, we didn't make their film. I'm sorry, it's what it is.
They wanted a film that condemned the Vietnam War, did they? Was that?
Well, they wanted more Napalm bombing, and you know, they wanted to see more of the Vietnamese side of things and all of that. I don't know. I remember John Hanrahan here writing for the Sydney Sun. Yeah, he gave it a terrific rap, and a couple of the other reviewers did too. But I think that Kennedy's kind of persona and his King of TV thing kind of tended to dominate and outweigh that critical thing. Now, I'll just tell you one thing about that. We opened that particular year, 1979, Graham Kennedy was made King of Mumba. And that happened in the same week as we opened down in Melbourne. I mean, that sort of thing was just absolutely incredible and a great help to the movie.
Now, I know there's a couple of microphones in the audience. Would you like to, here we go, there's one here and one there. Would you like to put your hand up and wave it around if you'd like to ask a question? There's a lady in the middle here. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. It's a bit hard to see with the light in my eyes.
No, it's fine.
Forgive me.
I used to get that from my mother. First off, hi Tom, it's Phil. Excellent film. It's actually better than I remember when I first saw it about 20 years ago. So congratulations. I wanted to ask two things. Was the spider in Equity? And number two, the editing style. Who's responsible? Just the editor or you and the editor? It just seems there's aspects of it that are very modern. The cross-cutting from contrasting scenes, from somebody delivering a joke to a bloody face being repaired, you know, and just jumping straight like that. It was really, really strong.
I think that was the expert work of the screenwriter. You know, he wrote. I can't. Funnily enough, David and Brian and I were talking about editing during the movie. Brian Kavanagh is a terrific editor, as I think you'll agree. It was the work that he did on the Odd Angry Shot. There was one shot where, you may recall, I'm on the feet as the guy, soldier, walks in, Gilmore is walking through the jungle very slowly, and he gets to a vine or something, and he goes, I can't, losing my balance, and he goes like that, and then on and so on, and he gets shot. Brian had cut it after the vine, and I said, no, Brian, we need the whole shot, because to get the sense for the audience of the creepy quietness and the way in which they move. So he put it back in, of course, that was right. But there are other things that he did that he was right and I was wrong. So, you know.
I think another example of really beautiful editing is the very end, when the group are marching this way that way across the screen, and there's a cut to the two of them walking, and they almost could still be in Vietnam because there's palm trees and things behind, and so on. I mean,
yes.
It's a beautiful sequence.
Yes, that's a nice cut, and of course, if anybody of you have visited Watson's Bay in the last few years, those palm trees no longer exist. They've been cut down, all of them. Every single one of them along that path has gone. And there's nothing there, just grass and a few scrubby old trees. Starting with the financing, it was pretty difficult. However, there were a couple of people in the government bodies that were very favourably inclined to giving us a go. One was Jenny Woods, who died unfortunately about a week ago. She was General Manager of the New South Wales Film Corporation at the time, and she was a strong supporter of Sue and I having a crack with the script for some of the reasons that I've already outlined to you. The other person that was very strongly in favour of the film, of again supporting the project, was a chap called John McQuaid, who was a commissioner at the Australian Film Commission at the time, under the chairmanship of Ken Watts. Now, Ken had come from the ABC, he'd been head of television. I'd done a program called Crackerjack in 1966-67, and Ken had kind of helped me along in my career, giving me the odd break. So those three people, well, I said two originally, but it's Jenny and John McQuaid. They were the prime movers in terms of the government support. And once they came on board, then we were able to convince Better, who had a stronger case to present to Roadshow, who came in behind us, and our lawyer at the time, Dick Toltz, was able to cobble together some private money on a tax scheme which he devised, which was later rejected by the Australian Tax Office. But it did get us some money up, sufficient money up to help finance the film. The film cost $620,000 in those days. Probably that would be the equivalent of what, 4 or 5 million now? Don't know. Danger Close, which I haven't seen, I'm looking forward to seeing it, cost squillions. I think that one of the... You mentioned about the Air Force and Francis Ford Coppola's movie, Apocalypse Now, David. One of the reasons why, so we were told, why it was knocked back was that he wanted the entire Australian Air Force to come in on the film, which consisted then of about 20 Iroquois helicopters. What we were able to afford, and what the RAAF would give us, were 3 helicopters for 1 day and 1 helicopter for half a day. Now, the thing that is missing after the last scene, where they're all supposed to be zillions of helicopters flying around, was done with 3 helicopters and 1 Chinook, because the guys very kindly were on a reconnaissance thing. They flew over the camp so we could take a few shots of them. So it's the way you get movies made in those days.
What about the box office? How successful was it?
Oh, yeah. Well, the first opening night, which was down in Melbourne, it was about a 450-seater, much about the same size as this, actually, and it was packed, and everybody laughed their heads off, and it was wonderful to hear the cinema full of people laughing their heads off. Unfortunately, I forget who it was now who distributed Deer Hunter, but that was following us about a week later. And so we're up against some big guns from America. Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now came out around about the same time. Coming Home had come out. There were the boys of Company C that died in a bum, thank heavens. So, yeah, we did pretty well. The film did get into profit, very modest profit, but it took about 10 years.
And the part of the moral of that story, and whenever I have a chance, I suggest this to people, is if you want to support Australian films, please go and do it the week it opens. Because if you don't do it the week it opens, it may not be there the week after. It's a hugely competitive business. Brian's got a new film called Palm Beach, which is really worth seeing. So some of you have obviously seen it and enjoyed it, and I would commend it to you, those of you who haven't seen it yet. It's really good. Another question.
That's not infusive enough, Dave.
Yes, I was just interested as to why that individual technical advisor didn't get a credit.
I thought he did.
I think he did. The technical advisor.
The officer you talked about.
Yeah.
Oh, he did he? Oh, I must have missed it.
Yeah, I think he does. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. Paul Thompson. I thought he did.
I think he does.
Yeah.
But mind you, films then don't have as many. You don't have to stay an extra 10 minutes to watch the credits like you do today.
That's right. That's right. Can I tell you a story about him?
Absolutely.
Or two stories, maybe. I don't know. The first one was the patrols coming through the grass, Bung's patrol, to meet up with Graham Kennedy's patrol who were waiting. And we rehearsed it, and Phil Thompson, but I said, Phil Thompson. Phil said to me, they're too close together. And I said, oh. What do you mean? He said, they should be more spread out. I said, but if I spread them out, we'll never see them on the screen. He said, oh, well, you know, that's the way it's got to be. I said, well, it's my ship. I'm calling the shots on this one. They've got to be sufficiently far apart so we get the sense of them being separated. But I've still got to see them all coming through the thing. Off he went in a bit of a humph. We didn't speak for about 24 hours until the Russians came up from Sydney the following night, and he had a look at them and said, yeah, right. So that was one to me. But the other thing, Ian Gilmore again, after the shot, he'd been shot, you know where he's screaming his head off? Poor old Phil. So Ian was doing this screaming thing in the grass. We were filming it. I looked around to see where Phil was, because I like to keep an eye on what he's up to and where he is, make sure he's happy. And he disappeared. And I said, oh, where's Phil? Oh, he just ducked off, you know. Anyway, I saw him the next day, actually, and said, are you okay, man? He said, oh, I couldn't stand it. Couldn't take any more. I said, really? He said, yeah, it was so realistic, he said. And of course, Phil had half his jaw, he'd stepped on a mine or something, and had half his jaw gone and his foot. I didn't know that.
Hi, Tom, Frankie. Just a question for you. 2 feature films, Australian feature films, that address the Vietnam War in 40 years. You have Danger Close being screened now, as we speak, 40 years after the Odd Angry Shot. And you have the Odd Angry Shot being screened in front of Vietnam veterans and their families and others. How do you feel about that?
I am absolute. Oh, sorry. Well, on one hand, I'm very, very moved that we're able to screen this film. This film still has some relevance and resonance 40 years after, that it still can connect to people, with people. That it still seems to be saying something to people, be different for different people. That's the first thing. About Danger Close, I can't comment about that because I haven't seen it. But it is remarkable that it's taken 40 years for another film to be made about Australia's participation in the Vietnam War. I know that they've been trying to make a film about Longtown for many, many years. And people like Bruce Beresford have been involved in certain attempts. I think Fred Skepsey was, and now, of course, Cripps Sanders has directed this one. The producers, they're Queenslanders, I think, and they have been trying and trying. They made a documentary some years ago about it, and they've been trying to get the feature film up for ages. Good on them. I hope that it does have as long a life as the Old English Short has had.
Can I just say something?
I did a film a little bit after this called Breaker Morant, which was a story of 3 soldiers who basically were executed because of a murder that had happened, and they were blamed for it when really it was the powers that be that had said that it should happen, but were told to go out and kill a fella. When that movie came out, it was incredibly well received all over the world, but particularly in America. Because in America at that time, there was a trial going on of a Lieutenant Calley for the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, which was exactly the story of Calley. He was being put on trial as being the person that had said this village had to be wiped out, when we know the orders had come from above. And so when Breaker Morant came out, I even had a critic say to me in New York, "Oh, this movie, you all made this movie up to actually be about the My Lai massacre." I mean, to say, no, this is our own story. And I've been in different places around the world where American Vietnam vets come up and tell me, I've had a number of them talk about Odd Angry Shot, but a number come up and tell me how much they love Breaker Morant, because that in a way rang a bell to them about their experience of being the soldier and the hierarchy.
How you going? The last scene when you have the 2 soldiers in at the bar and they said they weren't from a war. With you making a movie and you making a movie with a lot of the soldiers, did you hear about their stories about coming home and the way they were treated? And with the actors, with Brian and that, did they ever get caught up in that, like mistaken, like with a crossover from being an actor or for being actually in the war? Did they get any of that treatment as well?
Just to be sure, the question, Tom, I think the question is...
No, not at all, no. Do you mean, was there any repercussions from doing a Vietnam movie?
Yes.
Yeah, no, not at all. No, not at all. I mean, doing the Odd Angry Shot, for me, I mean, I could have been one of those blokes. And I know that if I'd have gone home that day and the letter had come in and said, "You've got to report for duty the next day," I'd have gone. There's no question, I'd have gone. That's what the government said we had to do. I had no political, I was just interested in, whether I could afford a second-hand car. I didn't have any particular nous about things. That was what I was told was the right thing to do. And so I would have gone, and I'd have probably gone like a lot of the blokes did, with a sense of sort of adventure, and then being like so many of you, the reality would have been far different. I know in the making of the movie, I mean, the politics of the movie of what Tom had to deal with, we as actors people either enjoyed the movie or they didn't, or I guess the main thing was that blokes that had been in Vietnam came up and said, thanks mate, that was really just how it was. So that was the most important thing.
I just add to that to say, I understand your question, that were we affected? No, at all, not at all. What I had hoped was that we would start a conversation about Vietnam and our role there. I mean, I felt that we shouldn't have been in Vietnam in the first place. What I'm looking for is a film about the other side of the story, about the Vietnamese themselves. But that's their story. They've got it. I can't tell that story. what I can do is tell the story about The Old Angry Shot, which when you boil it down is actually an anti-war film. And that's how I feel, and that's how it is.
I was 18, my birthday didn't come out of the barrel. I saw what went on. I have never seen this film before. It's just very moving, extremely moving. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Rowe, he did the title song. I guess he didn't have to have much persuasion to help out with that, having been a Vietnam veteran himself.
Well, that's right. I mean, the first, so I'd worked with, I'd had Normie on a Crackerjack show I'd done before, and didn't know him well, but got through Leeds Music. We rang him up and said, would you sing the song for us? And he said, I'd be delighted. And of course it was wonderful to have it there. He sings the song, he's got it on his website, and you can get it off. It's a good tune, but it's a bit of a downer but it suits the end of the song, end of the
it
film.
worked well.
I think so.
Yeah, no.
Okay, well, I think we have to call it a day. Before Yvonne comes and says something, which I know she's going to do, I would like personally to thank you all for being a wonderful audience. And I'd like to thank Tom and Brian for being so good.
Thank you so much, everybody, for supporting this amazing event today. Now, there's just one more special thing we need to do, and I'd like to invite Chris McKay, who's the Secretary at the Blue Mountains Vietnam Veterans and Associated Forces, onto the stage for a special raffle. And I'd also just like you to meet him, because Chris is the person who first approached us about doing this co-presentation, and he's one of our great Vietnam veterans, and we really value him.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. I'd just like to say it's very appropriate to the movie and the fundraiser is done today. This is Vietnam Veterans Day. It's also the anniversary of the Battle of Long Tan, where we lost 18 soldiers, 10 of them being national servicemen. I want to thank Mark Greenhill, Blue Mountains Council as well, particularly the hub here, Tim Smith and Yvonne, who have been absolutely fantastic helping us get it all done. I want to thank Romola Hollywood, who is my local councillor. I had a problem I wanted to be addressed. Like old farts, I sent her an email. I met up with her one Sunday before Christmas. We got the council problem out of the way, and then she said, have I ever seen the movie The Old Angry Shot? And I said, well, being a Vietnam veteran, I had, and I guess most of us have. And she said, oh, my father directed the movie, and he might be interested in coming up to show it to you one day. From that, we have today. So, Romola, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing what your idea for next year is. I want to thank David Stratton, Brian Brown, Tom Jeffrey. Look, without you guys, it wouldn't have happened. Any money we raise today will get a veteran off the street who is living in hardship with a shelter, could stop a veteran committing suicide, getting help, or just a veteran who's dropped through the cracks, lost contact with his family or fellow veterans. So on behalf of the association and on behalf of all veterans, we thank you sincerely. I'd like to ask our President, Peter Jones, to come up. We have a small memento to give you. And Rottler, if you could come up to the stage as well. Would you like to present this small memento? Two more things to do. The raffle, I'll get Brian to draw it, so it's all square.
Last time I did this somewhere, I won. C59. C52.
All received.
They'll all be received. And C02.
Just in closing, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience. Obviously, without all of you guys coming, it wouldn't have happened. I've never been in show business or the theatre, as you can tell. But as they say, it's all about bums on seats. And I'd like to thank you all for bringing your bums to To us, it's a very spiritual day where you remember brothers in arms who didn't come back, who were killed. To also think of some of the guys who have died since, some who aren't doing so well. But it's a time to reflect, think back, the good times as well as the bad times.
That's right, to remember the good times with the fellas that didn't come back is sometimes a real lifter for yourself. You can think back and think of all the laughs you had and all that sort of stuff. It really lifts your spirit and lifts your mood for the day when you can look back at things like that. It's really good.
It's a great movie about Vietnam. We had a full house. Everyone enjoyed it. And more importantly, we raised money for veterans.
Our main mission is for support for veterans. It doesn't matter, as long as it's post-World War II, it doesn't matter. As long as you're a veteran, that's our whole idea, to help them through pension claims, maybe a lawn mowing service if they haven't got the ability to mow their own lawns, all that sort of stuff.